I don't know if I said it last week, but last week I tried to do a presentation which I wasn't too happy about because it was disjointed and a little bit challenging. I tried to do something without diagrams, and even though it's something that we have been through before, but I might go to see you. Even though it's something we have been through before, I wanted to highlight and emphasize it, and I realized last week that I needed good illustrations to make it clear. Good to see you too, Brother Frenchie. So anyway, I'm going to revisit that topic. I didn't put it up last week because I wasn't so happy with it. So this week I'm going to try again. This week I'll make sure that I've made sure to have better illustrations that I think will help us to grasp it a little better. I know that we've all been through the book of Revelation, and most of us are, I think we have had a pretty good grasp of the overall shape of the book, but I don't think we can go over it too many times. One of the things that I am very anxious about, you know, I was telling somebody here where I am. We're actually with a large family group, mostly from family from Jen's side, and a very large group, maybe about 60 people. I'm kind of estimating. So, you know, I was speaking to one of them, and I was telling him he's I think he's a minister also. He's some kind of Christian person. I think maybe a minister, but maybe I think for the Baptists or Methodist, one of them. But anyway, when I told him that most of my interaction is online with folks online, he said, you know, he asked, how does that work? Because he said, when you have fellowship online, you don't get much of a feedback, and you don't really know whether or not what you are sharing is making any kind of impact. So he made a good point. He made a good point, but I was going to tell him that, you know, people express what they think in the chat room, and that we get to know each other better. We get close over time, and that we actually do learn in this environment. But I didn't get the chance because he got distracted. But it made me think about it, and I was thinking, is this really true? Are we at such a disadvantage when we meet online? And it is true that there are a lot of invisible people here, a lot of faces that I don't see, a lot of voices I don't hear, a lot of people, even people that I've never really met and I've never seen. And I know most of the time I have to be begging everybody to turn on your picture even now and then. But you know, overall, when I think about it, I think we have been able to have a blessing with our online meetings. Maybe if we were face to face, maybe it might have been a little better, but I mean, that's an impossibility because there are people from all parts of the world. And I do think more or less, one of the advantages we have being online is that we can use, I'm able to use the computer and bring up images and pictures and illustrations. If we were face to face, it would be more of a challenge. So I think that's one blessing. But I was thinking about it, and I think overall what I can say is, you know, I guess we're all learning. I think we're learning. I don't think being online has been a waste of time. You know, I think he probably was asking from the perspective of, you know, most other religious groups or church groups, what they focus on is fellowship and what they call praise and worship. But I was trying to explain that we have a high emphasis on a teaching ministry. And so my sister Susan says sometimes we have too much interaction. True. But our ministry here is mostly a teaching ministry, and based on that, from that perspective, I think by God's grace we have been able to be successful enough. You know, being face to face might not have made things much better. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling a little bit because I was really getting around to the point that even though we understand that we went through the book of Revelation, my experience as somebody who has been trying to teach this book for many years, over and over, is that you grasp the fundamentals, but you absolutely don't get to understand the nuances and the details, having gone through once or twice. The more times we go over it, things become more and more clear, and you begin to understand the purposes of God and the ways of God better and better. And so absolutely, one of the things that we will be doing is going over these books repeatedly. You know, sometimes we'll take a little break and go to something else, but we'll always come back to Daniel and the Revelation. So our Sabbath afternoon meetings will be most of the time focused on these two books. Of course, from time to time, if you have questions, if there are things that we really need to look at, fine, we will. But Daniel and Revelation is going to be the emphasis. I have recognized with greater and greater clarity that Revelation is the last book in the Bible for a reason. Revelation, I would say, is the climax of the, not just of the plan of salvation. No, if somebody says Revelation is the climax of the plan of salvation, I will disagree. I think it's the climax of God's plan of restoration, not of salvation of human beings, but restoration of the entire universe. Revelation is a big book. I was just this week contemplating that one of the things I'm going to do is to prepare a sermon entitled "The Head of the Serpent." But that takes us back to the book of Genesis, to the promise that God made to Eve in the garden. But it made me also remember that that story is finally played out in Revelation, because you find the serpent and the seed in Revelation 12. God really brings the entire controversy, the whole conflict, to its climax in the book of Revelation. And you see those Christians who say that Revelation is either finished back in the time of ancient Rome, or Revelation is still irrelevant to us because we are going to be gone in the rapture. That's what most Christians believe. We're going to be gone in the rapture by the time Revelation is fulfilled. They are heavily disadvantaged. There are amazing truths that they will never understand because they take that position. So anyway, I'm going to repeat the content of what I did last week, but with a different approach, and hopefully it will become clearer this week. I think most of us already have it, but as we look at it again, it becomes more fixed in the mind. As Brother Andrew was saying, repetition deepens impression. So before we actually go to look at my slides, my images, let me just repeat what all of us already are, I'm sure, are very familiar with, that Revelation is the way I understand it, can be broken into four major sections, or two major sections, but I say four because the first three chapters is kind of background as far as I'm concerned, background to the book. Jesus is introduced in chapter 1. Chapters 2 and 3, he says that the messages are to go to the 7 churches. So that's kind of background, 1 to 3. And then chapters 20 to 22 is a kind of postscript. It's the closing elements of the book. After the main part of the book is over, you come to the closing elements where, you know, the bad guy and his gang, they get what's coming to them, and everything is cleaned up afterwards. So Satan is put in the bottomless pit. He comes out, all the wicked are gathered together, and they are destroyed and thrown into the lake of fire. And then God creates a new heaven and a new earth. That is kind of like academic. When I say academic, there's no interpretation that you need for that. That is straightforward, black and white, no question about this. So the part of the book that really grabs our interest is chapters 4 to chapter 19. That's where we get the meat of the mystery and what God is doing, and the battle and the conflict and how we're involved. All of this it falls between those chapters 4 to 19. So that's the part that we have been really focusing on. And then those chapters are divided into 2 sections. So you have part 1 and part 2. Okay. So anyway, if you want to say part 1 is the first 3 chapters, then you have part 2 and part 3 and part 4. But the part that we really focus on, I divide it into 2 sections. The first section focuses on the kingdom of Christ. We have understood that Revelation is a book about the judgment of 2 kingdoms, the 2 kingdoms, not 2 kingdoms, the 2 kingdoms. The kingdom of Christ and the kingdom of Satan. That's what Revelation is about. So I hope everybody's getting the big picture, because we are zoomed out and we're saying, this is what the book is about. This is the shape of the book. When you see the big picture, you will never unsee it again. That's the beauty of seeing the big picture, because then you get the entire spectrum of what you're looking at, and anything that comes up, you know exactly where to put it. You know where it fits. And when you know where something fits, you can say you have an understanding of what is going on. Okay, it's not just a conglomeration of disjointed ideas. Everything becomes systematic, everything is cohesive and orderly, and you know exactly where you fit in the picture. So there are these, this is about the judgment of the 2 kingdoms. And then now the first part is the judgment of the kingdom of Christ. That's from chapter 4 to chapter 11. And the second part is about the judgment of the kingdom of Satan, or the kingdom of the beast. That's chapter 12 to chapter 19. When we say judgment, what I mean by this word judgment is examination, analysis, and verdict. Let me repeat: examination, analysis, and verdict. That's what I mean when I say judgment. Now, the word judgment can have several connotations. It can mean, you know, you say judgment will fall on you. You mean that some disaster is going to take place. Or judgment can mean an examination in a court of law. Or judgment can mean a verdict in that same court of law. So in this case, all the elements that are involved in this judgment that I'm speaking about are analysis. That means you examine the kingdom. You analyze the data and you come to a verdict or a decision. So that's what we are talking about. The kingdom of Christ is to be examined, the data analyzed, and then there's a verdict. Same thing with the kingdom of the beast. The data is examined and there's a verdict. And then we actually move on to where the verdict is executed and Satan and his kingdom are utterly destroyed. This is what the book of Revelation is about. And everything that you look at in this book, it falls under that umbrella of this judgment of the 2 kingdoms. Okay, so last week we looked at, I tried, when you look at the book of Revelation, you can view it in 2 different ways. Maybe more than 2, but there are 2 ways primarily that people will approach Revelation. Let me say 3 ways. And number 3, I'm going to throw out. Number 3 is that some people think Revelation is just a book, a collection of disjointed, unrelated prophecies foretelling future events, and they're not connected to each other. So you can pick up any section of Revelation, any chapter in Revelation, and read it, and whatever you read there, it stands by itself. So the different parts have no connection with each other. That, to me, is the craziest approach, and there are some people who believe it like this. But we can just dump that. We have nothing to do with that. The second view is that Revelation is a series of the same thing repeated 4 times. Revelation, four views of prophecy repeated 4 times. And this is basically what Adventists believe. Revelation 2 and 3, you have the 7 churches. That's the history of the church from the time of Christ until the coming of Jesus. The 7 seals repeats the same history from the time of Christ to the coming of Jesus. The 7 trumpets repeats the same history from the time of Christ to the coming of Jesus. The reign of the beast repeats the same history from the time of Christ to the coming of Jesus. So that is how Adventists view it. The same thing repeated 4 times. Now the third option, which is what I fully embrace and which I think those of you who have been a part of this fellowship, I think you're pretty convinced that this is probably the truth. I think so. That's why you are continuing to be a part of the Bible study group. All right. So how do I see it? I see both these 2 sections. I see it as a continuous narrative. You start with A, you go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. The sequence is consistent. It goes from one thing moves to the next thing, moves to the next thing, moves to the next thing, until you come to the end of the story. This is what I believe. So chapter 4 to 11 is in a logical, consistent sequence, and chapter 12 to chapter 19 is in a logical, consistent sequence. Now, I'm doing what I did last week, which I promised I wouldn't do, which is talk without illustrations. So I'm going to go to my illustrations, but I just want to pause a little. Let me pause and ask, is there anything that I just said that went over the head of anybody? Please stop me and let me know. Anybody? Good, okay, all right. Well, I'm going to go to my illustrations now. And
when you say logical, consistent sequence, are you saying chronologically sequential too?
yes, and I'm glad you asked the question, Brother Judah, because I'm about to explain why it is that there seems to be a little bit of an inconsistency in what I just said in terms of how I understand it. Because even though you're talking about a story, you know, when I was a boy, I used to like to read the books by a guy named Zane Grey. I used to love Westerns. If anybody ever reads, I mean, you have to have strong nerves to read Zane Grey, because he has long chapters and long descriptions of scenery, mountains and hills and so forth. You have to, but I used to like to read Zane Grey, and he has a very irritating way. And it's not just Zane Grey. A lot of these novels are like this. Okay, they tell you a story, and you're reading the story, and just as you come to an exciting part, what do they do? If somebody knows, you can unmute and tell me. They take you along chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and you come to an exciting part, and you want to see what happens next. And what do they do?
Flashback.
They take you back. The next chapter, they move on. They take you back into the past to show you something that happened in the past. I used to find it so irritating. They do it to kind of hold you in suspense, but they also do it to give you background information. The way they write, they don't take you back from the past. They start you off at an exciting point in the book, and then they carry you on. But you are at this exciting point, but where did it begin? How did it start? They don't want to start at the beginning because you might find it too boring. So they start at an exciting point, build you up to a climax, and then when you are good and interested, then they take you back to the more boring part, and you start to build up again. So this is acceptable writing style, and it is an effective writing style, and Revelation has it. Revelation has it. So that is the only caveat I would give. I would say, in terms of, it's a consistent, continuous narrative, except that there are 1 or 2 flashbacks. Now, because you're my brothers and sisters, I can talk to you freely. I am pleased. I am pleased that I was able to find these flashbacks, right? as far let me not say I was able to find it. I'm pleased that the Lord showed me these flashbacks. As far as I know, I am the only person in the world who looks at Revelation and sees these flashbacks. Okay, and because of these flashbacks, this is what causes the problems in understanding Revelation. The Adventists don't see this flashback, and so they see it as a part of the narrative of that section they're dealing with. So they have to find a way to say, for example, here an angel comes down from heaven and he has a little book in his hand. So that means we are not at the end of time. So the trumpets cannot be at the end of time. The trumpets, they have to go take the trumpets and carry you way back to the time of Jesus for the start of the first trumpet, because the little book is open after trumpet number 6. So if you read it as a continuous narrative, then the trumpet must have started centuries ago, and we are just now at the time of the little book. So we're about to see trumpet number 7. So they cannot say that the trumpets have to do with the 7 plagues or after the close of probation. All right, I'm talking again without my illustration, but I think you follow. I think you follow. Let me go to my illustration, and I will expand more as we continue. All right. So here is our images. Here's a chart. I'm going to fill in the details on this chart. In the top part of this grid, I'm going to put in the chapters, and in the second part, I'm going to put in the events, because the chapters and the events are not necessarily the same. For example, you'll have chapter 6, and in chapter 6, you have 2 different events. I'll put in the events in the second part of the grid. Okay, so first of all, in chapters 4 and 5, I don't know if you'll remember what is there. Let me bring up the Bible quickly and just remind you of what is in chapters 4 and 5. You go to Revelation 4, it says, I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven. And the first, so John is taken into heaven. That's what happens. And he says, a throne was set in heaven. One sat on the throne, and he describes what this person looked like, and he tells you that around the throne, there were 24 seats, 24 smaller thrones, and 24 elders sitting on those seats. 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, 7 spirits of God. And it tells you that there were 4 living creatures, and it describes what they look like. So anyway, what we're looking at is the judgment scene in heaven. This again is something that I'm kind of a little bit surprised that so few people pick up that this is the judgment. And one of the reasons is that there are not many people who believe that there's a judgment before Jesus comes again. That's the reason. They cannot make this into the judgment because most people believe that that is not true. But where do we find clear evidence of a judgment before Jesus comes again? Can somebody remind me of which chapter we would go to? Where do we find, I would say, indisputable evidence that there's a judgment that takes place before Jesus returns to earth? Somebody want to give me the chapter? Anybody? I'm sure you know, but anybody? All right, I stump you with that one. Well then, let me tell you where you'll find it. The passage in the Bible that cannot be. Thank you, Daniel. Daniel says Daniel 7, and he's absolutely correct. The passage in the Bible that tells you about this judgment before Jesus comes again very clearly is Daniel 7. It tells you that the judgment will sit, and they will take away the dominion of the beast and the little horn. The judgment will sit, and in the time of the judgment, the dominion of the beast is going to be taken away. That shows you that this is not after Jesus comes again. It is while the beast is still surviving, and while the little horn is still surviving and carrying on his depredations. At this time, the judgment will sit, and they will take away the dominion of the beast and eventually the beast is given to the burning flame. Daniel 7, from verse 9 down to about verse 16, then it tells you that the Son of Man came to the Ancient of Days. It's not telling you that Jesus came back to earth. Jesus is taken before his Father in heaven, and is given dominion and kingdom, and a kingdom that all peoples and nations should serve him. That is Daniel 7. And that same Daniel 7 is the chapter that makes you can see in Daniel 7 the same things that you see here in Revelation chapter 4 and 5. You see that there are 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of angels. Remember, we went through that. Same description. You see that a throne is set in place and God takes his seat. Same thing. So Revelation 4 is dealing with the same judgment. In Revelation, in Daniel, it says the judgment was set and the books were open. Here in Revelation 4, it tells you something similar. Not exactly the same, but it says there is a book sealed with 7 seals. Now, again, this illustrates that sometimes you have different prophecies given in different time periods. The information is the same, but the symbolism is different. Because in Daniel, it says that the books are open. But here in Revelation, it says it's one book and it has 7 seals or 7 sections. Same data, same judgment, but this time the way the data is recorded or is revealed is a little different in Revelation. God is going to open this book now section by section, and each section is described as having a seal. So the point I'm making is that you can see that we are looking at information what I was about to say on the tip of my tongue slipped off. Anyway, let me proceed and it will come back to me. So there's a book. The information has to do with the judgment. I think that's the point I wanted to make. The information both in Daniel and in Revelation here has to do with the judgment. And that gives us the clue for understanding how we are going to approach this book of Revelation. So let me go to the other diagram, the other illustration. So we are looking at chapters 4 and 5. And my illustration is, I actually borrowed this from a Jehovah's Witness book because it's a book that is the only illustration I found that has the elements I'm looking for. You can look here, you can see the throne, and around the throne you see the 4 living creatures. He's having 6 wings. And then in front of the throne you see the Lamb here with a book of 7 seals in his hand. Then you see the 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, and the 24 elders sitting around here. I kind of imagine that it probably, the way I imagine it, it probably was something like this. And then out on the outer rim, you can see this orange-looking circle. It represents the millions of angels that are gathered together. Then out of the throne, there's proceeding lightnings, and it's all on the sea of glass. Now, here's the thing. Most people will say that this represents when Jesus went to heaven, when Jesus returned to heaven on the day of Pentecost, and he received authority as king on the day of Pentecost. That's how, let me not say most, many Christians interpret it that way. It represents when Jesus went back to heaven after the resurrection and he received authority as king. Other people believe that this is just a normal day in heaven, but this is not a normal day in heaven. John has been taken into heaven specifically to see something happening in the future, because he was told, come up here and I will show you things that must happen after this. So this is something to happen in heaven in the future, And John is taken there to see this. If you understand this, you have received an important key. You understand that Revelation, okay, you go to the beginning of the narrative now, and you are taken into heaven. So what you are seeing is something happening in heaven. In heaven, something is being reviewed, and look who is there. Millions of angels are there. To do what? To look at what is being reviewed. They are there to see the information that is going to come out of the book of the seven seals. This is not simply God foretelling the future and giving prophecies to entertain people. Something is happening in heaven that grabs the attention of the entire heavenly universe. And John is taken there to participate by viewing what is happening and coming back and reporting to us what is happening. That's the truth about what is happening in heaven in Revelation chapter 4. It's something in heaven, future to the time of John, and we understand it is the judgment. It is a pre-Advent judgment, and an event of huge significance, though it is understood by very, very few Christians. I know how arrogant that may sound to some people, because you think, what kind of a claim is that you're making? If it's so important, how is it that only a few Christians understand it? If it's so important, why is it that you think it's so important when you have information on this and most people don't? And questions like that I am not capable of answering. But all of us can do one thing, which is we can look at the evidence and decide for ourselves. When I look at the evidence, I am mightily persuaded that it is true. Sometimes I have to examine myself and say, are you self-deceived? Are you suffering from conceit? Are you perhaps overinflated in your estimation of yourself? Do you think you're smart? I ask myself all these questions. And when I do a search, yes, maybe I'm conceited, yes, maybe I'm arrogant, all of that. A little bit. Maybe the Lord hasn't stopped dealing with me on that. But in spite of this, I think I'm balanced. In other words, I'm very slow to accept things. You have heard me say many times, I'm not by nature a conspiracy theorist. I don't jump on things. I'm very cautious. My children and my wife will tell you I'm cautious. I don't rush into things. I don't like to be wrong. I don't like to look like a fool. So I'm careful. So even in this, I think that same attitude has helped me. When I come out openly and say, this is what I believe, it's because I've looked at it carefully, in and out, up and down, and it appears to be very strong evidence. So I'm saying that for myself, and I'm hoping all of us will take similar care in what we are looking at. But anyway, having said that, that is the basis on which I say, even though only a few of us believe this has to do with a pre-Advent judgment, even though only a few of us, even Adventists who believe in the investigative judgment, they don't see this as having to do with the judgment. They approach the book wrong, and they have the interpretation of this wrong. But it has to do with that pre-Advent judgment. And that's how we understand what's going on in Revelation. That's a foundation. Okay, let me move on. So John is taken to heaven, and he hears a voice say, Jesus opens the first seal. And what does he see? John is standing there in heaven. Come on, John, where are you? John is standing there in heaven. And Jesus opens the first seal. The Lamb opens the first seal. And he hears a voice say, come and see. A voice like thunder says, come and see. Who is to come and see? I don't think it is John. It's a voice like thunder. This voice is inviting everybody to look at what is about to take place. And this is what John sees, kind of. The voice says, come and see, one of the four living creatures. And what John sees is a white horse. Okay. I animated that to some extent. What John sees is a white horse, with a rider on it. I automated it because I wanted you to understand this is not a white horse riding on earth. This is a white horse riding across heaven. In other words, John is looking at things like a movie. And Jesus opens a seal, and maybe out of the seal, there comes a white horse. What they are doing is they are looking at what is coming out of the seals, and the seals is the record of the history of the kingdom of Christ, or the history of the Christian church, if you want to put it that way. But it's the kingdom of Christ. It's the kingdom that is labeled with the name Christian. That is what is recorded in that book of 7 seals. And as the Lamb opens each seal, you see the church in different phases, or the kingdom in different phases. So let's go on. So what we see is what I would refer to as the judgment scene. All right, so that's that, the judgment scene. That's what we just looked at. So we move on, and that takes us through chapters 4 and 5. Now, you come to chapter 6, and I have labeled this section as 6a because chapter 6 has 2 parts to it. I want to divide it in 2 parts. So 6a, what do we see in 6a? What we see in 6a is the opening of the first 5 seals. Seal number 1, John says he saw a white horse, and the rider had a bow in his hand, and he went conquering and to conquer. That horse went riding across heaven. He opens the second seal, and there's a red horse, and the rider has a sword in his hand, and it is given to him to take peace from the earth. He opens the third seal, and there's a black horse, and there's a rider with a pair of balances in his hand, and he's willing to sell a measure of wheat for a penny and a measure of barley for a penny. And he's given the power, he's given instruction to not to hurt the oil and the wine. He opens the fourth seal, and there comes a pale horse, and the rider's name is Death, and hell is following behind him. So these are the four what is referred to as the 4 horsemen of Revelation. Now you can see that this opens all kinds of interpretations. Some people say it represents war, one represents famine, one represents plague and pestilence. They are trying in different ways to interpret these 4 horsemen. But by and large, they are supposed to represent great disasters to come upon earth. Now you understand that if you start where we start and you say it is about the judgment, then right away you eliminate all of that. It cannot be about disasters to come on the earth or anything like that. You eliminate that because this is evidence in the judgment. So you say, why would you take evidence and represent it as 4 horses? What kind of evidence can you get from 4 horses? Well, I will tell you. I'm going to go to, let me go to a verse in the Bible. I'll have to look for it, but I don't think it's hard to find. I want you to understand why God might use if you look at Zechariah 10 and verse 3, look at what it says. All right, verse 3, God says, mine anger was kindled against the shepherds, and I punished the goats. That's not the part we want. We want the second part. For the Lord of hosts hath visited his flock, the house of Judah, and has made them as his goodly horse in the battle. So he's referring to his people, and he said he had made his people as his goodly horse. God refers to the people that he will work through as a horse. The house of Judah, God says, this is my horse. And what do you mean? Because when a person went to war back in those days, his mode of locomotion was a horse. He used a horse or a chariot. A warrior went to war on a horse. So God says, I'm going to war, but my horse is the people that I'm going to work through. Judah is my war horse. Now, if you understand this, right away, we begin to understand why Jesus is seen riding a white horse in Revelation 19. When he's coming again, he's riding a white horse. You wonder, why does he ride a horse? Because he's going to battle. Who is the horse? It says his horse is his people. You see the same thing here in these 4 horses in Revelation, the 4 horsemen. 4 horses, but they have different colors. Now, why do we have these different colors with these 4 horses? Well, I'm going to suggest why. I believe that these 4 horses represent, well, I believe all the seals represent the history of the Christian church, the data that is examined in the judgment. That's what the seals are. Everything is recorded. So the white horse represents the earliest part of the church, the first part of the Christian church. I believe the white horse represents, and Adventists kind of believe the same thing too, but they take it as simply a prophetic view of what is happening. They don't see the connection to the judgment. So this white horse represents the early Christian church that went forth conquering and to conquer. You could say, if you examine the church at this time, you give it an A+, give it a tick, A+. But we know that the Christian church did not remain in that condition. In fact, as we went through the ages, when we say the Christian church, don't think I'm talking about the Waldenses and the Albigenses and those that we like to say were the true church. This is not the way that Christ views the public Christian church. Remember what Jesus said. He said that he planted a field, and what happened? When the grain began to come up, there was seen among the wheat the tares. Remember, he said that at the end, when his people are to be examined, you have sheep and goats. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that the way that God views the church, there are involved in this church, good and bad, everybody who is called a Christian. God, I don't think God looks at the Christian world and sees Roman Catholics, Baptists, Pentecostals, Anglicans, Methodists, Baptists, Adventists. I don't think God sees Christianity like that. God sees Christendom as, first of all who bear the name of Christ. That's the umbrella of the Christian church. And then now you have the genuine Christians, which is all who possess the Spirit of Christ. Those are the 2 divisions in the Christian church. All who bear the name of Christ and all who have the Spirit of Christ. But the difference is not very visible today, and that is a part of what the judgment is about. There is to be a separation, a filtering of true Christianity from only what is only nominal or what only bears the name. So what we know is that in the Christian church, in the church that bore the name of Christ, as a matter of fact, there's something else in the Bible that makes it clear. If you go to this passage here, let me go to a passage in 2 Thessalonians. You're all familiar with this passage, but let me read it anyway. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, look at this. I know we may not all have the same understanding of what goes on here, but I want to show you something. It talks about that man of sin being revealed. He's called the son of perdition, which means the man who is doomed to be destroyed. But look at what it says about him. He opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped. Now here is the verse, here's a part of the verse that I want to focus on. So that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now I've seen different interpretations of this. Some say that this represents the Vatican. I've heard people say this, and they say that the Pope sits in the Vatican. But there's a problem with it. because the Vatican is not the temple of God, and it never was the temple of God, and it never will be the temple of God. So that application, I would abolish it. I would negate it. I would have nothing to do with that interpretation, because it says that this man of sin sits in the temple of God. I've also heard it said that it signifies that the man of sin sits in the bodies of people, because we are all said to be the temple of God. I don't really see this as feasible the way it is expressed, because it says that this man of sin sits in the temple. The very structure of the statement and the very context of the statement suggests that there is a place where a person will sit. There's a place where a person will sit. And nobody sits inside of me or inside of you. This person is referred to as the man of sin. And Brother Judah says Lucifer, but I don't think Lucifer is the person here. Look at what it says. Lucifer is not called the man of sin. Lucifer is the agency behind everything, but the man of sin is somebody who is working for Lucifer. He's an agent of Lucifer. And I want to show you a little bit more. Let's look at it in a little bit of detail. But the point is there is another definition of the temple of God. And it has to do with what I'm looking at this evening. What is the temple of God? The Bible shows you 4 legitimate definitions of the temple. Number 1, there's a temple that God told Moses to make. We know that that is no longer the temple of God. We can eliminate that. Number 2, the Bible talks about, both in Revelation and Hebrews, it speaks of a temple where Christ is a true minister, the minister of the true temple that God pitched and not man. So we could say there's a heavenly temple. No man of sin can sit in the heavenly temple. That leaves us with 2 others. The third one is the temple of your body. The Bible says your body is a temple of the living God. Yes, but there is a 4th one that to me fits far better, makes more sense. And I'll show you where the Bible speaks of this one. It's in Ephesians chapter 2, and I want you to look at this passage in case you were not familiar with it. Ephesians chapter 2. It says in verses 19 to 22, now therefore you are no more strangers and foreigners, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God. And you are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. You're a part of a building. And it says, in whom, that is in Christ, the cornerstone, all the building fitly framed together groweth unto an holy temple in the Lord. The church of Christ is a temple that is growing up as a temple to the Lord, in whom you also are built together for the habitation of God through the Spirit. So what it is saying is that all of us, we are individual stones in some greater structure, which is called the temple of God. So in my understanding, the temple of God is the Christian church. So within the Christian church, this man of sin was to arise, and in the Christian church, he was to take the place of God in the minds of people, in the hearts of people, in the adoration and the authority that he took in the minds of people. He would sit as God. But I believe that it applies to the Christian church more fully than any other interpretation that we can give it. So the point I'm making is that the temple of God, the church of God, is called the temple of God. And it's not just those who are filled with the Spirit. Everybody who is named a Christian is a part of the Christian church. That's why the man of sin gets in there. He's in the church. The Antichrist is a Christian. According to this passage, the Antichrist is a Christian. And there are many passages that point this out. For example, in 1 John chapter 2, it says that many Antichrists come and they have the doctrine of Antichrist. It's clear from the Bible that the Antichrist is a Christian. The man of sin is a Christian because he sits in the Christian church, but he is exalted to take the place of God. So it's not my topic this evening, but I wanted to bring that up because I wanted to make the point. I wanted to make the point that the fact that you see evil in the Christian church does not mean that it is not the Christian church. It simply means that the tears are overwhelming the wheat. The tears are growing strong. The Antichrist is becoming, the Antichrist element is becoming very strong. So if you look at the church of Christ or the kingdom of Christ in the judgment, in the first part of the judgment, it is not looking too good for Christ's kingdom. That's the point. Because it goes from good to not so good, bad to terrible. By the time you come to the white horse, the condition is deathly. Instead of a church or a kingdom that is offering life to people, it is now carrying death. And this is perfectly exemplified because at this point in time, the face of the Christian church was the Roman Catholic Church that was persecuting Bible-believing Christians and slaughtering them by the hundreds, by the thousands. The Christian church had become an element of doom and disaster, of death for the world. And that's what in heaven they are looking, and this is the evidence that is coming out of the book of the 7 seals. Then they open, that is seals 1 to 5. No, we're not quite finished with 1 to 5. We go to number 5 now, and what do we see? When you go to number 5, you no longer see horses. What you see is that John sees some souls under the altar in heaven. I guess they might have been lying there. I don't know how it was pictured. But they are crying out to God and asking God how long before he would avenge their blood. And it says that they were given white robes, every one of them. And they were told that they should rest a while because there are still some people who are to be killed, some of their brethren who are going to be killed, and they should rest. Now, let me go back a little bit and let me show you something. These 4 horses, this is history. This is a history being revealed. History of the church. You can see it goes downhill. White, red, black, pale, and all of a sudden, seal number 5 is open, and we don't see a horse anymore. We don't see a horse. Instead, we see the souls under the altar. Where does God change? He was showing us the history of a church or of the kingdom of Christ, and he's showing you the way it is deteriorating. But at this point, what do we see? In the history of the church, it is clear to me that something happens at this point. It's almost like the church comes to a standstill, and we are about to move to a different phase. We are no longer looking at the horses. The church is not moving forward. It comes to a stop, and something happens. What happens? I believe what we are looking at here is in the history of the church, we have come to the time of the judgment, the very judgment that John is looking at in heaven. As he's looking at the history of the church, he comes to the point of the judgment in the history. I hope I'm clear. He's looking at what is happening on a timeline. He's seeing it in heaven. The horses are coming out. Then in the timeline, he comes to the time of the judgment. Why do I say it is a judgment? Because look at what happens. Look at what happened to these people. They are given white robes. How does that speak of a judgment? Well, let me say, who are these people? They are dead Christians. Why? Because we see them under the altar, and it tells you that they are the souls of dead people. So we understand that Revelation is figurative, symbolic. Dead people cannot talk. It is that in the drama that is taking place in heaven, dead people are also being examined. And when you look at them, their cases are crying out for vengeance, just like God said to Cain The blood of your brother Abel is crying out to me from the ground. Blood cannot cry. Dead people cannot cry, but God is using symbolic language. The same thing here. We are being shown an imagery that is not literal. But what God is saying is that as you examine the cases of these people, everything is saying, God, when are you going to make things right? The history of what happened is crying out for vengeance. But it says they are given white robes. Now, how do you give people white robes when they are dead? Because what does a white robe mean? What does a white robe signify? I'm going to show you that this is, for me, this is very clear and very strong evidence. These people right here. I don't know, somebody want to put in the chat and tell me, what do white robes signify? What do white robes signify? Somebody write it in the chat very quickly. I see a lot of conversation going on there. I don't have the time to. Brother Judah says worthiness. Somebody
is it
else,
the righteousness of Christ?
Sister Anita didn't write, but she said it. But anyway, I'll accept that. She says righteousness of Christ. Now, since Sister Anita answered, I'd like you to tell me, when do you receive Christ's righteousness? Anybody?
When you are born again.
When you're born again. Thank you, Brother Ray. When you're born again. So does it mean that these dead people are born again at this time? Now that's a difficulty, because these people are dead, and when you're dead, you can't be born again. But at this point, already dead, they are given white robes. You see why it is a difficult thing to understand. But I'm going to tell you how it makes perfect sense. When you're born again, you are given a white robe. Who sees that white robe? Who knows that you have a white robe? Anybody, answer me, please.
God.
Only God and Jesus. They are the only ones who know. Brother Matt is sitting there looking like a saint, but I don't know. Okay? I don't know. I suspect he's a saint, but I don't know. Only God and Jesus knows. So he has a white robe, but the white robe is not seen. When will your white robe be seen by all who are concerned? When?
Judgment.
When you're resurrected and you're born again.
In heaven.
When you're resurrected. Anybody else?
Judgment.
In heaven.
In the judgment. Thank you, Brother Ann. In the judgment. How do you know when a man is innocent? He knows. Maybe his wife knows. Maybe his best friend knows he's innocent. But when does the rest of the world know? When he goes to judgment and the case is opened before everybody, then his righteousness, he is not only righteous, but he appears righteous. And that is why you have this further strong evidence that we are looking at judgment. God tells us that these people who are already dead receive white robes. Dead people cannot receive white robes. What happens is that dead people are demonstrated to be righteous. They're given white robes, not now the invisible robe of Christ's righteousness, but the visible evidence that they are righteous people. So this is how you explain that dead people are given white robes. It's not the white robes of salvation, it's the white robes of vindicating their innocence. They not only possess white robes, but their white robes become visible. They are seen. The white robes are seen. So,
can I ask a question, David?
Sure, Brother Ray.
The passage where it talks about that we will be as judges at the throne of God. Can you explain a little bit? Because does that go together with this?
Indirectly, because that passage has to do with after we go to heaven at the end of the 1,000 years. You know, it's not related to this pre-Advent judgment at all. It's just suggesting that after we are taken to heaven for 1,000 years, the suggestion I agree with, which is that we will have the privilege of examining the lives of other people to sort of go through the same kind of assessment and to find out what kind of people they were. But it has nothing to do with salvation at that point at all. because by that time, of course, everything is over. So I won't look at it in this context because it's kind of unrelated. It's not directly related, brother. All right. So
thank you.
Brother David,
yes, Sister Anita.
sorry to bother you. Can I
Sure.
ask you, please? You said that these people that these souls that are under the altar crying out to God, that they did not receive a robe of salvation, but a robe of vindication. Why not a robe of salvation, Brother David? Can you explain?
Because
Or did they?
they already got the robe of salvation the moment they believed while they were still alive.
Okay, I see now. I understand. Okay, thank
Okay.
you now.
Yes.
I understand now. Thank you.
Right. If when you are dead, you cannot receive a robe of salvation. If you didn't get it when you were alive, then Sister Anita, dog nyam your supper.
Brother David, you make me laugh.
All right. I know you'll understand that very well. All right. So I already did it. All right. So this brings us then. You can kind of put some timing on this event because you see that so far we have looked at the evidence of the church going from good to bad, and then we come to a point in time where things are about to change. There's a judgment, and this tells us that this must be near the time of the end. We're going along and following the timeline. So the next thing we see is that we come to part B of chapter 6. The first part of chapter 6 shows you the first 5 seals, the 4 horses and the souls under the altar. 6b now is a reason why I divide it like this. In 6b, he opens the 6th seal, the sun becomes black as sackcloth of hair. The moon becomes like blood. The stars fall from heaven as a fig when she's shaken by a strong wind, and her figs begin to fall. And there was a great earthquake, and every mountain and island were moved out of its place. And the great men and the rich men ran to hide themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountain. That's seal number 6. Now, what do we expect next? We expect seal number 7. But as you go to the Bible, you come to chapter 7. So you're looking for seal number 7. But instead of seal number 7, what you see is an angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he begins to seal. He's told that he is to seal 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. And they seal from the tribes that we see here, these 12 tribes, they seal 144,000. So why do we see this instead of seeing seal number 7? It's because we have a flashback at this point. All right? The 144,000 don't belong here. Because, why do I say this? If you go back. By the time this happens, if you are not yet sealed, as I just said to Sister Anita, dog nyam your supper. That's Jamaican parlance, brethren, and it means that the dog will eat your supper. And the reason why the dog will eat your supper is because you are dead. Anytime you hear a Jamaican say dog nyam your supper, it means that you are at a place of disaster. So when this happens, sun turns to darkness, moon to blood, stars fall from heaven, and there's this great earthquake. You must have already been sealed, otherwise, dog nyam your supper. Remember what it says. In fact, let me look at what it says when this happens, so you can understand why you're going to be in trouble if you're not sealed at that time. Where are we? We're going back to Revelation. Revelation chapter 6. And look at what happens. Look at what it says here. It says, I beheld when he had opened the 6th seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, Now you know how Adventists interpret this, because they are looking at it, they don't understand the flashback. They don't understand the flashback. So they say, okay, you had the souls under the altar. All right, so they say, okay, that's the judgment. Then you come to the next thing, the great earthquake, and the sun turned to darkness, the moon to blood, and then what? And then the sealing of the 144,000. So they say you can't have the sealing of the 144,000 before the sun turning to darkness. It is not in this order. And so they say, if we are looking for the sealing of the 144,000, that must have the dark day and the earthquake and the falling of the stars must have already happened in the past. And that is why they say these things happened back in 1833, back in 1780 and 1755. They say the great earthquake was in 1755, the dark day and the moon to blood was in 1780, the falling of the stars was in 1833. And right now we are still waiting for the great earthquake, not the great earthquake, for the heavens departed as a scroll. That is coming up shortly. I'll show you. The stars of heaven fell onto the earth. And then verse 14, and the heavens departed as a scroll, and it is rolled together. Every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Look, if you're not already sealed, you're in trouble. The kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the mighty men, and everybody hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains. Why? Because they say, the great day of his wrath has arrived, has come, and who shall be able to stand? Now, Adventists say we have not yet experienced this. But they say we have had the dark day, the moon to blood, the falling of the stars, and the great earthquake, the Lisbon earthquake. All those are past. So they don't understand the flashback. I'm going to look at the flashback here now and explain how everything fits together perfectly. Let me go back a little bit. So we come to the time of the judgment, and I believe we are in this time. And started some time ago. We're in this time of the judgment. And those who died in Christ have been given their white robes. What are we waiting on? There's something to happen. When you read Revelation, the next thing that happens is the sun turns to darkness, the moon to blood, the stars fall, and the heavens depart as a scroll. That can't be. Because what about the 144,000? Where are they? Well, you go to the next chapter and it shows you the 144,000. But the 144,000 should have come before these great disasters. The 144,000 needs to be ready before these things begin to happen. But God takes you right up to the time of the great day of his wrath, the 7 last plagues. And at this critical time, like you're reading a good story and you want to see what happens next, God breaks it. And he takes you back to the past. He's answering the question, who shall be able to stand? He breaks the narrative and he takes you back to the past. And he shows you that there's a sealing. And 144,000 are sealed. And there are those who will be able to stand. So this chapter 7 actually belongs right there at the end of seal number 5. I'm coming to you, Brother Maddie. Give me a second. So you have sealed, you have here seals 1 to 5. Seal number 6 is the falling of the stars, the moon to blood, the heavens departing as a scroll. I don't believe that has happened yet. Definitely the heavens have not departed as a scroll. When it happens, it says the great day of God's wrath has arrived. That definitely has not happened yet. Right now, we are in the period here where we are looking at the sealing of the 144,000. And that happens right here between seal number 5 and seal number 6. This is where we are at the moment. We're in the period. Why did that change? Annoying thing. We're in the period where the 144,000 are about to be sealed. Then the 6th seal will follow. Then the 7th seal will follow. And we're going to look at that. I saw Sister Destiny ask a question. Let me see if I can. I saw it flash on my screen. Let me see if I can get the question and respond. So is that to say that there will be not the other true Christians that will be on earth in addition to the 144,000 when they are sealed? Where will they be? I think I missed something. Okay, Sister Destiny. The 144,000 are the only Christians that are going to be sealed in that period of time. Remember, the point about Revelation is that we are very specific that Revelation is limited to a certain point of time, which is the end time. But even during the end time, we come to a point where the last great crisis breaks upon the human race. What we're talking about at the time of the sealing of the 144,000, it's the same time that the mark of the beast crisis comes upon the earth. So it's at the window of time, the last moment of time. You have the world divided into two groups. There are only two groups. There's the 144,000 who have the seal of God, and there's the rest of the world who have the mark of the beast. So every Christian who remains faithful to the Lord will have the seal of God. Now, some people believe it's a literal 144,000, and so they say, wow, that's a remarkably small number. I don't believe it's a literal number. I believe that it represents every Christian who will stand against the mark of the beast. I also understand that there will be Christians who will die before that time and Christians who will be martyred during that time. I think it's going to be a terrible crisis. But I think that there are Christians who will die. The ones who live are the 144,000. They are the ones who, not in order to be saved, no, they are brought to a certain level of maturity, Christian perfection, if you want to use the word, because Jesus is going to use them as the final demonstration of his kingdom. So here's how it goes. The kingdom went from good to bad. White horse, black horse, red horse, pale horse. Downhill, downhill, downhill. Then comes the judgment. And during the judgment, it's not only an examination, it's also God doing a work of restoration. If you look at Daniel chapter 8, it's highlighted there. God is doing a work of restoration, and he brings the church back up. And the 144,000 is the final part of God's church in this world. And that group, that manifestation of the church is the demonstration of the kingdom of Christ that vindicates and justifies Christ's kingdom forever. So I don't know if that all right, I'm glad you got it, Sister Destiny. Brother Modest, I think you had your mic unmuted and I kind of neglected you, so go ahead. All right, fine. Okay, so I'm kind of assuming that so far what was a little bit unclear, you got to ask your questions. I'm moving ahead on that premise.
I have a question, David.
Sure, go ahead, brother.
Last week, you're on the same topic where you left off. We were talking about those that are dead from here on. They have a special blessing. I think it was in Revelation 12 or something like that. Blessed are those who from here on, they, in other words, they're dead. It's a special blessing. Is that blessing are those part of the 144,000? Do you think?
What it says is, blessed are the dead that die in the Lord from henceforth, from this point on. But it tells you why they are blessed. It says because they rest from their labors and their works do follow them. So when we say there's a special blessing, I don't think it means that God drops something extraordinary upon their head. It tells you they are blessed. Why? Because they are able to rest, while the rest of us are not going to be able to rest. So you might say they are better off than us because they get to rest. They don't get to face the terror of that last crisis. And furthermore, it says, and their works do follow them. In other words, all that they have done for the cause of God, God takes it into account. But they still get to rest. So It's really talking about people who died, Brother Ray.
Thank you.
So, you're welcome. Let me move on. So, here's another illustration of what we're talking about. You have the white horse, red horse, black horse, pale horse. Then you have the souls under the altar, which I say represents the judgment time. And then the next thing you will have is the great day of God's wrath has come. And what happens? There is a gap between seal number 5 and number 6, which is it's a flashback. In that spot, you have the sealing of the 144,000. So that's the way. That's not the way it reads in Revelation, but that's the way we understand it if we understand the flashback. So the sealing of the 144,000 comes after seal number 5, but before seal number 6. When seal number 6 comes, as I said, if you're not sealed, I'll use the phrase that I used again, dog me, I'm your supper. All right? So then we go on to chapters 8 and 9. In chapter 8, you have the 7th seal being opened. Look at this diagram again, and you'll see we have seals 1 to 5, seal 6, and you expect the next thing to be seal 7. But instead, God dropped in the 144,000. And as I pointed out, these belong back here. That's when they were sealed. All right? But God put them in at that point. As I said, it's a flashback, and I hope everybody thoroughly understands that. I don't know if I can make it any clearer.
Brother David,
Yes, Brother Matt.
can I bother you for a question?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I had asked this, I just put it in the chat, but I was curious to know if this flashback thing is in the Bible anywhere else, in a story, or because nothing comes to mind right off, not being pointed anywhere. But I would feel better if I was to see this in action somewhere else. Not to say that it's not true, but if it was used anywhere by Jesus, I don't think so, or by any prophet.
It's in other places in the book of Revelation, but that question is a question I never looked for an answer to before. But I will. But I'll tell you something. You will find similar situations in the books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and even Ezekiel. But it's different because these books are not designed to be a continuous narrative. But when you read, for example, Isaiah, you'll find chapters that belong after chapter 20, for example, and you find them at chapter 10. The book is not in a sequential order. And I don't know how that happens. I think it's just the way the Jews or whoever put it together. But you find chapters earlier on that belong later on. And as a matter of fact, the very books, the order of the books of the Bible, they say that Job belongs before Exodus. In chronological order, Job belongs before Exodus. And of course, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, they belong before Psalms and Proverbs and those other books. So, but to find a story specifically, I'll have to look for it because I can't think of one.
Doesn't mean it's not there. If it's a clue to help us to understand, then it should be somewhere else, I would imagine.
All right.
Not seeing it. But
Sister
yeah, thank
Destiny
you.
also said something that is interesting, which is I think makes sense. She says Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24. You'll find places in Matthew 24 that belong later in the narrative. Jesus gave a narrative in Matthew 24, and not everything there is in sequential order. But it's a little challenging because it's one chapter, and we're looking at Revelation, we're looking at the longest narrative maybe that you will find in the Bible. You know, it's a continuous story. You won't find any other story of this length anywhere else in the Bible, hardly. You know, it's probably the only novel kind of book that was written in the Bible. You know, but anyway, I promise I'll look, and if I come upon something, I'll let you know, Brother Matt.
I think it's a strong foundation.
Say again?
I said, I think it's a strong foundation to work from.
Sure. Sure. Yes, Brother Malik.
The explanation you gave is pretty clear that you can't have the sealing after the sixth seal. You have to have it before the sixth seal. So that's pretty much concrete proof.
Yes, it's kind of self-explanation. It kind of the context kind of demands it, you know. But once you see it, you won't unsee it. But until you see it, sometimes you never think of it. Anyway, let me proceed and see if I can get through. I just want to look at one other flashback before we conclude this evening. So when the seventh seal is open, there is an angel with the censer. First of all, there's silence in heaven, but then there's an angel with the censer, and he throws down the censer to the earth, and there are voices and lightnings and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail. Now, let me go back a little bit. What we see is that we come to seals 1 to 5, seal 6, seal 7, and then the 144,000 is dropped back in its right place. When the seven angels are about to blow their trumpets now, what people say is that it's a different history we're starting over. We're going back over the same history from another perspective. This is not true. What happens is that we see seal number 7. Seal number 7 is the opening, is the blowing of the 7 trumpets. The 7 trumpets come out of the 7th seal. So it's not a different history. It's the same narrative, but now we're zooming in. We're zooming in on seal number 7. That's what is happening. So we zoom in on seal number 7, and we see that there are 7 angels, and they're going to blow their trumpets under seal number 7. So the first one blows his trumpet. You have trumpet number 1 to 6. First one blows his trumpet, and there is hail and fire mingled with blood, falls upon the earth. I believe these are the 7 plagues, okay? Because 144,000 is sealed, and the people said, the great day of his wrath has come, and who shall be able to stand? What is the great day of God's wrath? I'll go to the Bible and show you quickly before I proceed. The great day of God's wrath. What is the great day of God's wrath? What does that imply? Revelation 15, look at what it says, verse 1. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 plagues having the 7 angels having the 7 last plagues. For in them is filled up the wrath of God. In them is filled up the wrath of God. So when you come to the great day of God's wrath, you have come to the day of the 7 last plagues. So that is what happens. The 7 trumpets are about to blow, and in them is represented the wrath of God. So the first one, hail and fire mingled with blood fall upon the earth. The next one, a star falls upon the sea, and it becomes blood. A third of it becomes blood. Another one falls upon the rivers and fountains of waters, and a third of them also become blood. The fourth one blows his trumpet, and a third of the sun, a third of the moon, a third of the stars turn to darkness. The fifth one blows his trumpet, and the bottomless pit is opened, and there comes out of the pit locusts upon the earth. I believe the bottomless pit refers to the condition where grace has left the planet. Probation is closed. I'm not going to try to interpret these 7 trumpets because I don't know what these details mean, but I know it is after the end of probation, and I know it corresponds to the 7 last plagues. That much I know. The 6th one blows his trumpet, and the 4 angels are loosed, which are bound in the great river Euphrates. What happens next? Again, you have a break. Again, you have a break. You go from trumpet number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then there's a break. Now, remember, these trumpets represent, as far as I understand, and what I'm sharing with you, I believe that these trumpets, why is this thing misbehaving like that? These trumpets represent the plagues. That means we're at the end of time. All right? And yet, in spite of this, you go to the next chapter, you see an angel come down from heaven. He has a book in his hand. And we believe this book is the book of Daniel. Because after John eats the book, it's sweet in his mouth, bitter in his belly, and he's told that he has a message to give to the world. And we believe that this message is the same message that we are to carry to the world, a message of prophecy that has its origin in the book of Daniel. Daniel makes us understand that revelation is about the judgment. And that is the key thing that the angel has in his hand. And so it's a message of prophecy. And so what do we see? We see that there's a little book, and then John is told to rise and measure the temple. And measurement, again, is a symbol of what? Somebody tell me quickly, so you're on my wavelength.
Time.
Judgment, investigation.
Sure, I see Sister Destiny said judgment. Yes, Brother Ian said it, but I didn't hear him. Brother Matthew says, or somebody said investigation. Yes, a judgment based on investigation. So we are seeing this judgment come out in the souls under the altar, in the little book being opened, and here again in the measuring rod. So again, this tells us that the time of the little book being opened is the time of the judgment. Round about the time that the judgment begins is, or that the judgment is taking place, is the time when the little book is open. So again, we see that we have been taken back in time. This cannot be during the time of the plagues. God again is taking us back in time. We are looking at another flashback. And then it shows you that there are two witnesses, two prophets, and they are to prophesy clothed in sackcloth. And we understand who these two prophets are. We're not going to deal with that today. They're not two literal people. I believe they represent the word of God and the Spirit of God working through the 144,000 or through God's people. Then these two witnesses are killed. The word of God becomes ineffective. Why? Because it's the end of grace. Probation is closed. God's Spirit has left the ungodly world. So the word of God and the Spirit of God is dead, effectively dead. But after 3.5 days, they come back to life, which means that the prophecies begin to be fulfilled. The plagues and all that is involved begins to be fulfilled. And everybody is compelled. The fear falls upon them. And they give glory to God, even though they are not saved or converted, but they are frightened by what is happening. So, again, we can see the seventh angel blows his trumpet at this point. And at this point, there are great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. The judgment has come to an end. So you saw the sealing of the 144,000, then the angel throws down the censer. That's the end of probation. Then you have the 7 trumpets, which is God's judgment upon the apostate Christian world. And then finally, you have the 7th angel blowing his trumpet, and the kingdom is given to Christ forever and ever. The first part of the judgment of the kingdom of Christ, has come to an end. The rest of Revelation is about the kingdom of the beast, the judgment of the kingdom of the beast. But again, I want to show you.
I have a question here, Brother David.
I'm coming, Brother Ian. Let me just make my point quickly. So we saw that the 144,000, the time of the sealing goes back to the time just after the 5th seal. And also, you look at the little book and the 2 witnesses, it doesn't belong there either. It goes back to the same point in time. The opening of the little book would have been at the same time that the judgment of the souls under the altar, seal number 5. The opening of the little book would take us back to that same point in time. So both of these flashbacks go back to the same time. So if you take out those 2 gaps, you would say then judgment scene, seals 1 to 5, seal 6, seal 7, and then the 7 trumpets, and then the mystery finish. So it would be in sequence. The things that don't belong in order is the 144,000 and the ministry of the little book through the 2 witnesses. And you see that the 2 witnesses' ministry is the same as the 144,000 sealing. Okay, so those two parts that you take out, they correspond to the same period of time, and they go back to the time during and after seal number 5, but before seal number 6. Go ahead, Brother Ian.
Yeah, the question I wanted to ask was, why did it say the 4 angels are bound up in the river Euphrates?
Okay. 4 angels are used over and over in the Bible to represent a great time of trouble. Great time of trouble. If you go to the book of Jeremiah, you'll see at least 3 places in there where God talks about. And if you look at Revelation chapter 7, it says 4 angels are holding the 4 winds. So wherever you see 4 angels or 4 winds, in that kind of context, it represents a great time of trouble, usually conflict among the nations. So when it says 4 angels are bound up in the river, remember the river Euphrates represents the masses of people that support Babylon. So what it is saying is that in the people that support Babylon, in the billions of people on the world today, there is a very great potential for a great conflict. Now, 4 angels represented here as holding that great conflict from breaking out. So the angels have been bound in the river Euphrates because they are not allowing the Euphrates River to be let loose. But when these angels are released, what we can imply is that there is about to be the greatest time of trouble. Remember, it kind of corresponds to Revelation 17, where it says that the 10 horns will make war against the woman, eat her flesh, make her naked, and burn her with fire. It appears that the multitudes of people that support Babylon, which is the river Euphrates, there's going to be some great kind of conflict that breaks out based on the masses of people that support Babylon. That's the best I can say.
I would imagine if it had said that the 4 angels were holding or bound in the river Euphrates, it would be plain, but I still don't understand why it says that they are bound up in the river. You know, it's
Well,
like these angels are tied up in the river.
I think it's figurative language, symbolic, but at the same time, if you say your life is bound up with somebody's life, what does that mean?
I mean, you're deeply involved.
It means that you and whoever is being referred to, you are in a relationship that is unbreakable. If you say your life is bound up with your children or bound up with your wife, it means that the relationship is unbreakable. Okay, so I take that meaning to it from it more than to say that they are tied up there and can't move. It means that based on the work God has given them, their duty and responsibility is connected to the river Euphrates. Like there is a destiny bond between them and the river Euphrates. In other words, that's how I understand it.
So were they're restraining the Euphrates, the multitude, doing a work of restraint on them?
Revelation 7 shows you that at least one of the things they do is restrain.
Yeah.
In other words, you could say the river Euphrates has to follow where they lead. You could put it that way.
Okay.